Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I've got thrills, chills, laughter, and digressions galore for you as we travel to Vancouver Island for a virtual visit with New York Times bestselling author Chevy Stevens. I've been a fan of Chevy since her debut novel, Still Missing, rocked my reading world and probably yours back in 2010. 5 equally outstanding books followed. Now, after a 4-year hiatus, she's made a triumphant return with Dark Roads, a deeply atmospheric story about a desolate stretch of road in British Columbia known as the Cold Creek Highway, along which numerous women have gone missing over the decades. Will 17-year-old Haley McBride be one of them? Dark Roads is Chevy's 7th book. Her titles have been published in more than 30 countries and optioned for film. Still Missing, which was inspired by a what-if question straight out of her former life as a realtor, won the International Thriller Award for Best First Novel, while Stephen King called those girls incredibly scary and suspenseful. A Library Reads top 10 pick for August and a number 3 bestseller on the Globe and Mail's Canadian fiction list, Dark Roads has also proved popular among the author's contemporaries, including C.J. Box, who called it an instant classic and raved that Stevens is a brilliant and unique talent. That may sound like a lot to live up to, but you're about to learn the truth of it for yourselves, because all dark roads lead to Chevy Stevens. Hey everybody, welcome back to Central Booking. I am very excited today to be in the virtual company of New York Times bestselling author Chevy Stevens, whose new book, Dark Roads, is out right now. And I just have one question for you all. If you haven't read it already, what is wrong with you? Not that I would like to insult my readership, but it's really great to have you on the show, Chevy. I have to say there's few authors that I've followed from book one to where they are now, at least for somebody who's been around for a decade. I mean, if you have 2 or 3 books, that's one thing, but several books in a lot of years. So I think that must be a testament to you that I'm still reading them as quickly as they come. So welcome to this show.
Thank you. And I didn't realize you've been with me since the beginning, so to speak. So that's really cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's Still Missing. I still remember discovering that book, and you were very kind. And I actually did like an email interview with you back when I was doing Hartford Books Examiner a bazillion years ago. And
I'm always happy to hear I was nice. Like, when it's like a long time ago and people go, "Oh, I met you." And you're like, "Oh, I hope it was a good day."
Yeah, I've actually just, spent this last 10, 11 years waiting to settle the score. So let me tell you how not nice you were.
Remember that interview? You refused.
Yeah, you didn't want to do it then, but here you are. So I have no idea why you want to do it now if you didn't want to do it then. I mean, I think you've done pretty well for yourself. So of course I'm going to ask you about Dark Roads, and I will try not to be spoilery. I'll be relatively general in my questions, and you can choose to be as detailed or not as you want. But I figured I would start by asking you this. You've been, pretty open about the fact that this is not really the book that you were expecting to write. And so it's been, I think, 4 years since your last book, and you reached a point where you were working on something and you just decided that, hey, this isn't really working for me.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about that experience, because I have to think, living up to your own expectations, but then also balancing expectations of your publishers and your readers, that has to be a very difficult thing to do, to say, this is not up to my standards, so I'm going to pull the plug for a couple of years. So can you just talk about that experience and why you chose to stop that and come to this?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, it was really quite awful, but it wasn't a good time. It certainly wasn't my intention. I've heard people say you're sabbatical. I'm like, well, no, it was really more agonizing. It wasn't.
Yeah, like you weren't working.
Yeah, it's not. I wish I could have said that I worked, took 2 years off and then got back into it. But no, I spent about 2 years trying to get a couple different projects. I think I spent first year on one project, and it just was too slow. It just wasn't doing what I had envisioned. And one thing I've really learned 7 books in is your synopsis. It doesn't matter how beautifully written your outline is or anything. It can still blow apart. And I think a lot of newer authors might have this issue too, where they say, well, my editor really liked it. Why didn't they like the written? Well, because it doesn't always work once it's actually been in paper and you've trying to make a whole book out of a thought, and so I spent a year and I just knew it wasn't good. And I have a very good working relationship with my editor. If it was my first book, this probably would have been a very different scenario. But, we talked, and then I was like, this isn't working. And we discussed another idea I'd had. Again, I tried to come back at it. I usually find the first 50 to 100 pages are where I can get a sense if it's going to get off the ground or not. But it takes me a long time to get the good 50, or the same level of thinking and everything has to go in. It's not like I can just blast out 50 pages and see if it works. I still have to spend a long time planning to get the good 50, which may or may not actually be that good. And in that time also, I had really burnt myself out with my previous book, and I had told myself I wasn't going to work to that level. So in that time, I have a daughter. When I finished my last book, she would have been only about 3.5, I think. So she was pretty young, and I'd been working really hard through all her young years and her toddler, and they start wanting you a bit more and doing a bit more and communicating. And so, if she was sick, I didn't work. I took time with her. And, I took the foot off the paddle quite a bit, which is very opposite of what you're supposed to do. So internally, there was the war of, you're supposed to have a book out a year, you're going to lose all your fans, your publishers are going to be mad at you, you suck. Everyone else just wrote a book a year. So-and-so over there just wrote 4 and you're still on this one. And so there was a lot of that. But then the other part of me is like, it matters more that you have a good book. It matters more that you have a good life. Mm-hmm. It matters more that you're enjoying this. Like, you're okay. Our house isn't falling apart. Life is okay. If it takes longer, it takes longer. What can I do? So, so there was a lot of that going back and forth. And then when I did land on this idea, it still took quite a bit, and it still took 2 years. And yes, I felt a lot of guilt about that, but I kept telling myself that would be part of the story, and that it really didn't matter if it took less time, if it was a sucky book. Like, it just doesn't, like, it has to be good. And I'm a thoughtful writer. I spend a lot of time thinking. I daydream. That's just me. I can't sit there for 8 hours a day. So my process is my process. It's like wishing you were blonde when you're born brunette. Like, it's just, although I guess you can change that actually. Maybe that's a bad one, but you know what I mean? Like, everything that makes my books what they are is that I'm this kind of person. And so this kind of person is a thoughtful writer. So it took a while, but hopefully
I have to say, I really respected that decision, because you were very open, on Facebook and stuff about, look, this is what's happening. And it's not that I'm not writing. It's just, I want it to be the best that it can be.
Yeah.
And I think, as a reader, it's like, well, great. I mean, as much as we want that book every year, we also want to get the best book from you as possible. And for you to have the ability to self-reflect and say, this is not, something that I want to force to be out there and have it part of my, catalog.
It feels very shameful. It's a weird thing. Like, it feels like your guilty secret. Like, so I'm still writing. Like, it felt very like, it's like, if I was literary writers can take a decade to write something, but genre, you're really not. And again, if this had been my first couple of books, I think that could have messed me around longer. But I had, I did have a good fan base who were willing to wait. And I just had to go, okay, well, this is what's happening. Yeah. I had to believe that it was meant to be, and,
well, it was worth the wait, it was totally worth the wait. And I think that that's what people are going to remember, is it's like a really quality book. And I would rather have like this than something that you were kind of, I put it out there because I had to put something out there. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you
you can't just make that magic. You can't just go, okay, well, book number 8, magic happen.
Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. You're just disillusioning me. And then isn't that how you really lose your readers, is when they start to get
I just open my idea book and
I need to get a copy of that. Maybe that's what I've been the idea book. Well, if you want to send that my way, like, I'm just
mostly I open the idea box. Some of them shoot that way, some shoot that way, some go over my shoulder, some exploded in my face. And way at the bottom, I found one that I could maybe work with for a little while.
That's right.
That's how the process is framed. Pardon me?
Yeah, you just had to find it. It was there.
Yeah. And it was buried. And even the original, how it ends up looking in the end isn't even how the original starts. That's the amazing thing. It just grows and grows, right?
Yes, and
But
that's
if
the
you don't
thing.
have a strong premise, like I've really tried to learn this and beat this in my own head, that if you don't have that really good, strong premise, and in my case, being whatever your book is, in my case, a strong premise is a big problem.
Right.
Small problem ends up small books. And if it's an old problem, for some reason, that for me fizzles. It works for mystery writers because they're always going back trying to solve but mine just like, oh, and I get bored even writing them. I'm like, ugh. Like it's like you need a really scary thing, but 7 books in, it gets harder to come up with the really scary thing. And then also the really scary thing that not everybody else is doing.
Right.
And, and a really scary thing that I can do. And so, I guess I always tell, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. So
it's very true. Everybody thinks they can write a book until they try, and then you learn real quick.
And a lot of people can write and are great writers, but boy, do you have to be tenacious to see all the way through a book, because it's it's gonna rip you to shreds.
It will. So much discipline. Like I've decided at the end of the day, like if I had to choose between writing and reading, I think reading is going to win every time. But fortunately,
hey, me too. Like I'm a professional and it's my job, and I would choose not to write. It's hard. Like, these writers who I read online or whatever, like, oh, I just got up and I couldn't wait to get to the keyboard today. I'm like, to like surf TMZ?
Yeah, why?
And they make you feel like, really? It's like, that's the kind of talk that's going to get you beat up at conferences, man. Like,
oh, I know.
But,
and it's got to be funny too, because like so much work goes into writing a book. Like this was 4 years of your life, and we read it in a matter of hours, a matter of days, and then we come to you and you say, that was great, what's next? And you're like, ah.
I passed a neighbor today and they said, when's your next book? And I'm like, just going to do some errands. Okay. It's going to get right back to it.
Yeah, it's tough. We have expectations.
But I tell myself that's a good problem to have.
Sure, absolutely.
Every time people would be like, when's your next book? I'd be like, that's a good problem to have. People care, and that matters. If they stop asking, I've got a problem.
Yeah, it's so true, but so much pressure. Like, you have a whole life beyond all of
All I could think is like, God dang, this better be good. Like,
yeah.
Talk about expectation level.
Right. Well, that's what I thought, but then it was. So,
thank you.
To like bring it back to this for a minute, let me ask you about the premise.
Yeah,
sure. It is a terrific premise. And that's so important, is I think a book that actually lives up to the premise, because so often you'll read a synopsis, you'll be like, this is the book that's really going to resonate with me. And then for whatever reason, it doesn't. But so step into our little virtual elevator. If we're all going up together, hopefully up and not down, and you had to describe this book, in its essence and sort of pitch it to people on the elevator, what would you say are the, basic essential elements of this book?
Right. Well, I think my one sentence tagline, like my movie description was, a young girl runs away from her home, a bad home life. And basically she fakes her disappearance on the Cold Creek Highway, which is infamous for missing and murdered women for decades. I just fumbled my entire sentence, but bad highway.
Bad highway.
Let's just go with that.
Bad highway, bad thing.
Bad highway.
Bad highway.
Bad things.
Well, when they make
bad
it
man.
into a movie, that's what they'll call it. It'll be bad highway.
Bad man on the bad highway.
Yep.
So there's a really bad highway. Some bad stuff happens.
It's so true. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because it's actually, it's fiction, obviously, but it's based on a real life case from northern British Columbia, known as the Highway of Tears. So can you talk about what resonated with you about that case and how you sort of took it and fictionalized it? What this book is?
And it was very difficult. It was a really hard process. I had to really ask myself inwardly. I typically try not to write true crime or about true crime, or because I never really say what I struggle internally at the best of times that we're writing, murder in a fictional, entertaining way. And there are people who our entire lives are devastated and are dealing with this all the time. And so even just in general, I try to be respectful of that. Like I try to never be gleeful, like something you're talking, they're like, just almost a gleeful tone, like, oh, this one's really bad. I'm like, people died. Like,
Right.
so so in this case, it being like Highway of Tears is a very famous highway in British Columbia. Now I think it's been over a decade since there has been any victims on that highway. But it's a really long stretch of road, and I think they're not exactly sure how many people have gone missing, or they suspect, because it's kind of more of a general area, and there was never really any one person caught. I think they think there was at least three suspects. Towards the end, there was one younger guy named Cody, someone who was responsible for three murders in that area. But I don't think they call him the highway killer, because it's more just this bad stretch. But in the early 70s or whenever it was, there was a predominant amount of Indigenous women, and a lot of that is the area between the reservations was a long distance, so for them to get around, they often had to get rides. And I think a lot of it goes down to the remoteness of the area. This highway is not necessarily uncommon. I know the US has big stretches, and a lot of it is opportunity. I think they know that the odds of running into other traffic is slim. The cops rarely can patrol it. They're small communities, and often marginalized people are who they know that they have unfortunately a better chance of getting away with it. But there was racism, there was RCMP didn't take a lot of it as seriously as I believe that they are now, and have been. They did eventually form a task force, but it took them a long time to even realize these were connected, because again, this was before they had computers where they could be like, oh, well, you had well, we did too. Like, it was all separate, and so, but it was more I was just trying to think of things that were haunting, like what were really out more than that outright obvious fear, just what was really spooky and creepy and all those things, and emotionally rich. And the Highway of Tears is just this really profound. There are documentaries which I encourage people to actually see, but I didn't want to write about the real highway for all those reasons. Also, it's such a complex history. I would spend 50% of the book probably trying to explain that highway. Right. And because there's not just one person and all these other things. And for me, it wasn't about the highway. I wanted more about what it would feel like for somebody who lived near that highway. Do they become desensitized? Are they more aware of it or less aware of it? Because it's just kind of their background noise to them. Like, do they think it's over? Do you think it won't happen to them? Like, all those things. So Haley, I very much just wanted a girl living there, and the immunity of the young, they always think it's not going to happen to them because they don't take those chances and all those other things. And that was mixed also with me wanting to write about the Me Too movement was really coming into force then. Pardon? The next door. Okay. My assistant has checked in, and yeah. So, and where was I though?
You were on the highway in the Me Too movement.
Driving. Fog. Yeah, I didn't want to write about the real one. I wanted to write about Haley, and authority figures, was becoming more and more people in position of power, whether they be priests, police officers, gym coaches, hockey coaches. And so, I had some images around that. So I knew I wanted to make, that one of the villains, a police officer. This is no disrespect to all the really awesome police officers out there, but I knew that person that was a person in position of authority would have a certain amount of power. And so just really more about a woman who kind of inadvertently used that highway as a way of disappearing. Like, if somebody disappeared on that highway, you would automatically think, okay, so they must be involved. And then the other side of that is I wanted to, the initial concept of this book was only told from Beth, and she was a victim's sister who came to that town. And honestly, initially she was hitchhiking a lot to try to trap the killer, but you can't have 400 pages of somebody hitchhiking trying to catch it runs out of steam really fast. It's like, okay, not this one. Get into the next track. No, he was nice. Like, how many cars are you gonna get? How many near close calls? It's too small of an environment, right? So I was like, well, that failed. And then I think the second edition was that hadn't found her sister's body. And so she was searching the woods and the highway for that. Well, again, you can't have 400 pages of a girl walking up and down a highway, because then it's like, not that ditch. So it gets like a little, I was like, okay, that's not going to work either. And so then it evolved into two characters really telling two flip sides of a situation, which I like having two narrators. I find that they can each tell different parts really well, and you can use them to spin off of each other. This one knows something that this one doesn't. And so I find that for a suspense writer is enjoyable for me too. So it sort of evolved, if that is an answer, and the Highway of Tears, like I often hear about crimes or unsolved things, and I'll weave them into my books and I'll answer them or give them a resolution or do little things. And it's just half the time people don't even know I did it. It's just, for me, my own little thing. I'll name a character after a murder victim that I have heard about in a complete separate case that doesn't fit this story at all, but I'll use the name as a way of honoring that person, so I'll do little things for myself all through there. And I try to, although I couldn't write from a First Nations perspective, I didn't feel that would be proper at all, culturally or just anything. I just didn't think that was right. And also, the types of characters I have, they're very problematic or not great people. So I also, had to be really careful there and sensitive. And but I also tried to weave the First Nations culture, and I tried to give that through Haley, because she has a great love of the woods and nature, and being from the coast my whole life, we don't realize how much of First Nations is a part of our lives that we don't even know, like our town name, what was the original name, and smoked salmon is such a staple, and it so there's all these things that I weaved through there, and I tried to make that a part of the opening, which there were a few people who felt that I should have tackled that and made the characters First Nations or the victims First Nations. But as a white person, I really couldn't do that. Like, I just couldn't. And I thought that would be really culturally insensitive. So that's how I picked sort of more like a girl and a very small little, I didn't attempt to solve the entire case. Sure. I had a small thing.
Right. And so
that's my long answer.
It was a good answer, but I think it really gives an insight into the choice making and the work that goes into a book that we read as entertainment. And like I said before, we read it very quickly and we enjoy it, and then it's over for us. But I think one of my friends said once, and I can never remember the name, but easy reading makes for damn hard writing, and it's so true.
Yeah, and I don't get when people say, "Oh, I read it in a night." I'm not like I'm like happy. That's good. I did it well. That's what I want. All my work is so that can happen for you. But a lot of the choices we make, sometimes people don't understand. Like, it's like a story is like a live thing. It's like, and it all fits and forms. And sometimes the choices we make, well, why did she do that? Well, because if I didn't, all of this would have gone.
Right.
So sure, if she hadn't run away, but then bye-bye book. So, so you do work within something I did different. This one was having the two main girls are younger. Beth is in her early 20s. And typically, if I've had one younger person, I've had an older person. Right. So this is something I talked over with my editor, like, do you mind if I make them both young? And she's like, yeah, give it a try. Because again, it wasn't working. Beth was older initially. I had Beth older. But she being older, it didn't make sense why she was broke. I mean, she could, but they become less admirable when she's living in her car, doing, pills and hanging out with a 20-year-old boy. Right. Beth got less sympathetic. So I needed to make her younger to explain. Plus it created a better animosity, a grudge disrespect, respect between her and Haley if they were similar ages and if they shared Johnny as a friend. And so it gave me, and also I liked her better younger, and I enjoyed her story more. And if I wasn't doing that, I wouldn't have been able to do what I do. And so you just kind of have to hope it resonates. Like I had a few people say, oh, it's YA. Well, no, it's very much not YA. Just because it has younger characters doesn't make it YA.
Right.
But regardless, I had to do that to make this book work, or it would have never worked at all. So.
Yep. And I'm like, if it doesn't work for you, then it's probably not going to work for us, because you can always tell when the writer has been very much belabored.
Yes.
But you've spoken of Haley, so can you give us a bit about her background? She's interesting because she's got a real independent streak, and unfortunately, she finds herself in a new living environment, and that kind of snuffs out that independent streak and sets up sort of a very toxic, combustible conflict with the man that she's now living with. So can you touch on that?
Well, when you have kids at a rate, and again, I needed her to be in conflict, so I created two very opposing ideas. I needed her to be able to, explain how she was able to live in the woods for a while, which is not a secret, that we know that from the background. And so, of course, I had to give her those skill sets. She couldn't just walk out of this, so I Googled some stuff. I think I'll be okay. She needed to have a background in that. And I always just kind of envisioned that she'd had a father who was a really strong outdoors guy. Initially, her mom was living, but then it's easier if you get rid of both parents. So bye, Mom. And also I think that girls, I wanted to really, the contrast between a girl who was giving a lot of freedom by her dad. He trusted her, he believed in her, he let her kind of run wild, and she, in her mind, was doing okay. She was, a small town girl who rode a bike wherever she wanted, had buddies, did what she wanted, and wasn't necessarily by the book good, but she wasn't messing her world. She wasn't a train wreck. And then her uncle, who she ends up having to live with, her uncle and her aunt, and her uncle is not by blood. And he is the polar opposite. He's Mr. Rigid, Mr. Rules, Mr. By the book. And he's slowly, in the guise of trying to protect her, is making her world really, really small. And then she finds out some things. And young people, this is why I like writing about young people, is they have so few options if they want to leave, or go. They don't have money, they don't have skills, they don't have a job, they don't have all those things. And on paper, this guy looks really good, right? So it was really just trying to hone into that contrast between them.
Sure. And so speaking of that guy, so, he is
Vaughn.
the authority figure, the policeman. Yeah, Vaughn, the Iceman, some people call him. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because we learned really early, and again, this isn't spoilery, but he has some kind of predatory nature, and we're not sure just how far his proclivities go. So I wanted to ask you about the process of, taking that question of just how bad is this man and stretching it for an entire narrative so you don't really know until the end of the book. Like, how difficult is that for you to balance in a book like this?
It's difficult because he has to be not so obviously awful that nobody in town, like everyone in town, knows he's like, he took a long time. I made mistakes. I tried him one way, he was too over the top, or, I had to have him lecture certain things, but do it in the guise of helping her, because he still had to sound like a cop, but like a controlling cop. And so, yeah, it's a lot of it's like soup, too much salt. Okay. Add water. I really had to hone in on what is his main thing was, controlling, but in the guise of it looking like he's a really good cop. So it had to be all under that line. And, unfortunately, of course, there's way more good cops and bad cops. And we have friends that are police officers, but it can also bring in if somebody wants to abuse power, they will be attracted to those type of careers, and where they're in a position of authority, and to show what those kind of people can get away with too. Like, you listen to podcasts, it's not unheard of to have a police police officer use his badge as a way of getting away with some really bad predatory behavior, for sure.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that recently,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I
Yeah.
thought I'd ask
It's
you too.
horrible.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and it's like the
It's
truth
like
is
you have the
being.
ones that they're not for the power. They're doing it because they really want to, actually help. And then you have your power junkies who are doing it because they like being in control. That's
Right, and then those are all the stories you hear, and then everybody else gets a bad rap for the,
don't they get
sort of
psych
few
tested?
outliers.
Yeah, I know. I'm surprised. I'm like, did he make it through the psych test? Like,
And how?
yeah.
But I
Yes.
guess if I'm walking around free, anybody can find their loopholes.
Yeah. Well, if you listen to podcasts about like, I don't know, not so much in Canada, I don't know, but in like cops way back in the day, I think you just had to take like a 6-week course. Like some of them, like it wasn't like it was a job that you could just get hired for. Like it was kind of boggling to realize that just anybody who was like, well, I need a job, and then in 2 weeks they were a cop.
Yeah, like doesn't happen that way anymore. But I never would have passed a physical
Now it's
exam.
3 weeks.
I would have been
Yeah.
toast.
Yeah.
Like, so let me ask you too. So one thing I really love about this book is Haley has a friend, Johnny Miller, who he's a fellow dirt biker, and they have this really cool dynamic. But what's so refreshing is that it's platonic. It's not like this romantic tension. But they have a great dynamic that really gets heightened when Haley decides she's going to disappear. That really raises the stakes for both of them. So can you talk about how that decision on her part really reflects on both of them and what the consequences for them might be?
Yeah, and that's something she has to come to terms with at a certain point too. Some of my favorite movies and books are loyal, like have that real loyalty. Like I just love that, whether it be, Irish brothers who grow up and then decades later are still, I love loyalty, that kind of blue collar loyalty too, which is sometimes stupid because you get the guys who will do anything for each other, whatever. But I loved that. And I also really liked that they were male and female and they were really good buddies and friends and they just loved each other. And that's the kind of stuff I like. Like I like reading that. And yeah, he had to help her. But also, this again was also conscious because I knew that if she was going to be living up in the mountains, I needed her to have help.
Right.
So I kind of had to have him sort of interacting. But yeah, inadvertently, she doesn't realize that he's complicit in this plan that is altering, the his trajectory of his own life too. And that again, loyalty, that theme of loyalty, when do you not derail your own life? Like I know people and guys that are so loyal that it's like to the point of stupidity, frankly. Like when's self-preservation kick in? Like maybe don't go down with the burning ship. Get the lifeboat. Like we won't think less of you if you survive. So there's definitely that blend, and he is most certainly loyal, like to the fault. But that's what we makes him very admirable and attractive. And also I don't think he thought that it was going to go quite that long. There's also that other thing. There was, I think how things intended initially isn't necessarily how it evolved for them. But Johnny was certainly one of my favorite characters, and if they ever made a movie, I think I would really love to see just Haley and Johnny and just show that friendship on screen. And I just loved it. That's the kind of guys blue collar boys, I just love that stuff.
Yeah, it was great. And like guys and girls can be friends. Like
Yeah.
it can happen.
Well, and Haley in the book is gay, and that kind of I was worried that people would again play into, oh, is it a tomboy cliche?
Right.
That, oh, can men and women only be friends if so I was like, I don't want them to think that, but it wasn't a conscious thing. I just knew, I didn't say, well, I want to have, a gay character. She just was. I just kind of knew that very early. The very first scene I had her in a restaurant, she was checking out the waitress. And I was like, and I thought, no, there's going to be backlash. People, I don't want to make her the cliche tomboy, dirt bike riding, whatever. But I'm like, no, she just is. And so hopefully I still think that men and women can be friends. I do. I still think that.
Why?
It just gets problematic when one of them gets a boyfriend or a girlfriend.
Yeah,
Or
that.
as you get older.
Oh, that third wheel. But hey,
Yeah.
she told you who she was and you listened. I mean, really, sometimes your characters just say, hey, this
Mm.
is me, and you don't want to betray
Yeah.
that.
There are things we can change, there's things we manipulate, and then there's other things where it just conceived that way and it was always that way and it will always be that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let me ask you about Beth too, because Beth is the sister of Amber, who does become a victim of the highway, of the killer. Yes. And there's a really interesting dynamic here between, her and Haley and also Johnny. So I'm wondering if you, and again, it's not that stereotypical like butting of heads because there's some romantic tension, like who's going to get the guy. It's more kind of like who's going to do what's in his best interest and who
loves him the most, who cares about him the most. Yeah. And I think that can happen between friends or even siblings or like friends. I think you can get an ownership over your friend, and you get another friend who's giving different advice and you're like, well, that's not what I told them to do. And, there can be some possessiveness there for sure. And I think Haley is very dependent on Johnny. Her world got so small that Johnny really became her lot more than just a friend. He was her outlet, and that's not healthy either. And Johnny was develops feelings, him and Beth grow an attachment or a connection on a different level. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you need to show growth, of course, within a book, but I don't always know when I first start writing what my character's growth is going to be. Like, you want them to escape the bad person, but what internal journey is going to happen. And so that sort of evolved. For the realization for me was that Haley is going to, have to realize some things about her connection with who deserves a life outside of that and things like that. And Beth is wrestling with a lot too. And it was initially going to be her story. Like I mentioned, she was an older woman, and I think I thought of her as like late 20s, 30s but then she got younger. And I just like the idea of she being a bit more of a city person and how they're both dealing with grief in really different ways. And just showing those two ways of containing it and how it's leaking out and what ways are they showing it or not showing it. And Beth is showing it in a really messy way, and which is, I like messy. They're fun to write, but with her she's had to contain it and act okay for so long that she's kind of imploding. Right. She's just going, I'm just gonna blow it all up behind me. But in doing that, she does find her healing and find some redemption. And sure. I think some people didn't connect as quickly with Beth because Haley appears to be stronger and more goal oriented, and she's going to do this, and Beth is floundering a bit, but which is a very real. And she also needed to be different. They couldn't be the same. She couldn't also be equally, out there strong. She has to be strong in a different way. And so she was experimenting a bit more with. She doesn't yet know what's going to make her happy, and right. She's trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I loved about the structure of the book. And I won't ask you too much about that because you already sort of talk about how it came to be, but there's this great balance because it really is a three-part story. So you have Haley at the beginning, and then you have Beth, and then in part 3, their stories kind of intersect, and it works really well to show, how very different they are as characters, but sort of what their common ground is too. And so I thought maybe I'd ask you just quickly if you can speak to Amber's character and how she sort of bridges them together. And that allows her to be more than just a victim, even though, she's not alive for much of this book. She's very much, a poignant figure in the connections that other people make based on her.
Right. That's a really smart question.
I must have been a mistake.
No, I'm like, wow, I didn't even know I did that. I love when people's questions make me sound way smarter than
how good you are.
And it actually, that's exactly what I was going for. What you said. Can you repeat that?
That's what I thought. And I was like, she is smart.
Meanwhile, I'm like, well, that looks good. Now, originally, like I said, it was Beth's story. And then it changed to both of them. And I think I had Beth come in within a few chapters. She was actually earlier, and I had them mixing and matching. But it was challenging because sometimes you're kind of making up stuff for the other person to have to say. Moving pieces. And then it was actually a discussion with my editor after she read one draft. She said, I think Beth needs to come in later, but we need to know a bit more of her story ahead. And I had short circuited and just kind of had her there. And so in going, I realized that the advantage to that was we could learn about Amber because like you said, Haley and Amber are friends. And when Beth comes in, we learned that she was Amber's sister. So she's telling us a part of Amber that we didn't get to know and we didn't get to see, and we see the family side of it. And now in a typical thriller, the thing there is the cost of that was a bit of pacing because it is more depth. It's more detail, it's more emotion. But without that, it would have just been flatter. I think you would have taken away the depth of the story, which is Amber's voice and who she was to her family and who she was to Beth. And also she's telling us a part of her feelings towards Haley, how she loved Haley and thoughts she had about Haley that we didn't know because we were only in Haley's perspective. And something I did differently with this book, which I had not done before, and it was upon encouragement of my editor, was to write Beth in third person. Every book I've ever written is first person. I don't know. He said, she did. So that was a bit of a learning curve to make them sound different because they were similar ages. And I enjoyed that. I liked it actually quite a bit. And it allowed me to play around and stuff. So that was interesting, to see two different people's perspective of this person and how she's still bringing them all together. And of course she opens the book as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it just achieved like this beautiful balance, and I was really impressed by that. But when you get to actually talk to somebody about the process, you realize just how much goes into that. Like, it just doesn't show up as like this beautifully structured book. I mean,
boy, I wish. No, and then cutting all those pieces, and then some of them, I've been blessed. That night was the only book that I've ever had where the structure was pretty much almost, I think the first chapter changed a bunch of times, but other than that, like the weaving of the timelines fit like the most perfect puzzle. But that's the only time that's ever happened to me. Like this one was, I kept thinking when I was doing this, like, have I gotten suckier or is this just harder? Like I did definitely a lot, like, either this is a more complex book, because I kept thinking, why is this taking me so long to do all this? So I was like, either this is more complex or I'm just not as good. But I think that it was definitely more complex to weave all of that in there, and the feelings.
Yeah, once you open the word of feelings, I mean, when is that ever straightforward? No.
I know.
If you don't mind, do you have a little time? Can I ask you a few more sort of general questions about the away from darker? I could keep you here all night, but I won't do that to you. Your daughter wants to eat. I mean, Mommy,
I'm not cooking. My husband's feeding her probably.
Hey, good man.
I know he does all the cooking. We're not a typical family here.
Well, we like atypical. I'm all about that. But that is awesome. So kudos to him. But I wanted to ask you, about Still Missing. So that was your first book, back in what, 2010, I think?
Yeah, and I started that in 2005, though.
Yeah, see, it's a process. Like, these things do not happen overnight. I know people say you're an overnight success, and then it's like, longest night of my life. Like, 5 years of very long.
I worked on this book for so long that my daughter, I realized, didn't remember me writing anything else.
Wow.
Because even though I'd written two, but she was a baby.
Right.
So I've been on, I remember one day she said something, well, when you're done, I said, well, when Mommy's done, she'll write another book. And she was like, whoa, what? You're going to write another one? Like, she just assumed that in her mind, it was all when Mommy finishes the book. So it became this deadline of when Mommy finishes, everything's different. I'm like, no, Mommy starts again. And she was like, oh,
all over again.
Yeah.
It was like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, she was like, what?
It blew her mind.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about that, because the what if moment for that book really came out of a real life experience, because you were working as a realtor and you showed a house and you thought, what happens if the person showing the house gets abducted? And so that's a terrific premise. but how has your generative process changed? Because now you do this for a living. And so
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's a whole different sort of creativity process, because you can't just pull those what if ideas just don't probably show up like they used to.
Or they might, but they're not all good. I probably have a lot of what ifs, but you can't follow. I think I can't remember who I read recently who said that, like, I think there's a really good book called The Idea Book, actually, which I've recommended to some friends. It's very much about how, sure, you can generate a lot of ideas, but to see it, they don't all hold up.
Yeah.
They'll fizzle pretty quickly. So I've learned that difference. So yeah, it's a lot more. You've never seen a more panicked writer, and this happens to me or my friends, when we don't have an idea, like a good idea. We can all have ideas, but one that is going to hold up, or when we see it that it's starting to fall,
right,
that's when that panic comes in, where you're like, wait, that won't actually work. And then it's like, oh my God, I don't have a book. Like, that's very frightening. It's like stepping off into the unknown. It's a horrible feeling. But what I do, I've learned a little bit more about what the test is for me. Like, can I see it holding? Like, will I be able to have more bad things happen out of this bad thing? So I have a few of my own little tests now that I do. My editor is one of them, obviously. We'll pitch, we'll talk. But also I keep like a little running tab, so to speak, in my computer of interesting things, plots, ideas. And when I sent it to her, I have like maybe 5 or 6 different premises, but I already knew probably which ones wouldn't work for my style of writing, what ones would probably end up slow, what one, because I'm learning a little bit more.
right.
And so, but I keep a running commentary of ideas, and they're not all in my genre. I have this really cool fantasy book idea that I just put, or I'll hear about really interesting crimes or unusual things, and I just keep notes. And when it comes times, I'll come back and I'll see what may or may not be the one I'm working on. I can tell you a little bit if you're interested in. I knew that I needed something scary. Like, that's the preliminary test for me now. Is it going to be scary enough? That's just for what it has to be. And also, and I don't want to write constant serial killer books where women are getting killed all the time. Number one, how many serial killers can I put on personally, I'm trying to veer away. Although Dark Roads was missing, there really only was one person who passes away during or dies during the process of the book. I didn't want a big bloodshed graphic. I'm trying to experiment with different ways of being scary. Right. So for this one, it came sort of a dream. I had this picture in my mind of an RV just kind of like careening around corners. And I thought about, well, what if you're carjacked on a vacation in an RV, like and then that grew from there. Because what I liked about that is it's a home invasion on wheels.
Right.
And I liked the concept of so the elevator pitch to this one is a young couple on the run, carjack a married couple on a vacation. And so you can see what's all the thing. I knew all the things that could potentially happen and go wrong, and how it's going to be that cumulative, they get in deeper and deeper and deeper by the choices they're making and the problems that are going to ensue. And, I could see what could come out of that, because it was dangerous right from the beginning, like right from the start. But again, things evolve. I realized very quickly, and if it works, but talk to me in a year, who knows? But I'm setting this one in the late 70s because I just had a runaway book, and one of the big issues to deal with is cell phones.
Right.
They're a freaking problem, because nowadays they can trace those again. And you got 4 people who potentially have a cell phone, and I got to get rid of all 4 phones and explain why they couldn't get to a phone, or, and all those other things. And also every gas station has cameras, and, it's traffic lights. They can track, one person does something, they can have bus photos, they can track that entire person's day almost. So I really like nostalgia. And also I picked 1970, I think it's six, I said, because that was when the Montreal Olympics. So the Olympics are like a big cultural thing that I can build this around. They're camping because they're going to the Olympics and all the things that happen. So
That's a
that's
great premise. Home invasion on wheels, like that, you know.
Elevator pitch.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
So let me ask you too. So I would assume, you know, you've been at this for a while now, you've developed a real loyal readership, and they can sort of get savvy to your ways. So let me ask you about coming up with the twists and turns, because, you know, you have to surprise your readers, you have to satisfy them, and you want it to be credible. Like, how hard is that after, you know, 7 books?
Incredibly hard. This is, thankfully, I have a really savvy editor. Like my editor, I think she's actually the president. In the time that I've been with her, she's also elevated completely with St. Martin's Press, Jennifer Enderlin. She's like, I think she's like the publisher, like the.
That's awesome.
And so she's brilliant. So she will tell me if somebody's too obvious, or if I need another red herring, or how, you know, so I really have that person to point that out. But yeah, so I have to mix it up. So the current book is going to have a different scenario because they do get savvy. Also, a lot of I do find it harder because thriller readers read a ton, and they get really disappointed if they can figure it out. But sometimes I'm like, but there was only like 3 people it could have been. Like, you know, like I couldn't pull out somebody that you never met, but he just happened to be driving there. Turns out. Like,
yeah, it turns out readers don't like that.
No, they really don't like that. You just pull out some. I've had those books where you're like, really? And it was that person we met once in the entire novel, and we never even actually interacted with them. They were off the page the whole time. So, you know, it gets challenging for sure. And also, you have to have a present threat all the way through. You can't bring the threat in. So who was the threat along the way, and all those things. So you have to mix it up. And I would say probably that's what I'm doing right now. It's less investigative and more the threat is present. It's the tumbling threat. You know those books where they make bad decisions and then another freaking bad decision, and now, oh shit, we've just gone and done this, and now we have to do this to get out of that. Like, you know, those are simple plan books.
And so it sounds like my life.
You know, right? Yeah. Okay, so like that. So that's sort of where I'm, so to freshen it up for them and also for me. And there'll be people who might not like that style, but I feel like you can't just be cookie cutter. It still has to be my brand,
right?
But it has to be a different type of fear or different type of fear.
And that's it. Like everybody wants the same but different, and sometimes finding that different can be very challenging.
Well, and like domestic suspense, it still does phenomenally well, and this isn't to hack on it, but for me, I can't come up with any more ways to have bad husbands and bad wives, and it's always the husband. I think, you know, like I don't write posh books well, I guess I would call it. Like the second they get too educated or live in a city, I'm out. I can't do it. Like, it's just not me, and it rings very untrue. It sounds like me trying to sound like a grown-up writer. Like, it's just, you know, you have to stick with, I believe in growing as a writer, but it really doesn't ring true when I try to step out too far out of my essence, I guess.
Sure.
And so even though that might be the, you know, it's like, well, I can't do that. It doesn't work for me. So, but yeah, those books are phenomenal and they do very well, but I'm a blue collar girl. I think I said I was going to write a memoir one day that's pickup trucks and ponytails, or ponytails and pickup, one of the two.
I totally read that.
Right?
Like,
I know. It's like, what am I going to do?
Album, you know,
there was a truck going down the road. It was a dark road. I got a book.
There's your tie-in.
Yeah. And Wolf. We didn't talk about Wolf though. You didn't ask Wolf. Wolf, the dog. He's like my most famous character in Dark Roads ever. You know.
Yeah, like the dogs are the characters you end up, you know, you can do anything to your humans, but don't touch the four-legged.
Oh no. But Wolf has become so popular. I had no idea. Like, people can give me they'll give me a 2-star on Goodreads, but they'll be like, but I really love that dog. I'm like, huh. I was saying to one of my friends, I should write, or my publicist, I said, maybe I should write like a book, just Wolf, like Genesis, like his original just his story. How did he get to that barn on that day? And then I can imagine the reviews, like, what are they? Good dog, good book.
Wolf is very memorable though, man. People love their pets.
I'm like, merchandise, I could have Stuffles. He's not a wolf, he's actually a border collie, hence the confusion. But yes, anyways.
But as long as Wolf goes on. All right, last few questions. They're probably going to be quicker, but I wanted to ask you, when you started.
You think they're quicker, but I might have a lot to say.
I make a liar of myself, but you're keeping me honest. I wanted to ask you about the role that parenthood plays in your storytelling, because when you first started writing, you were not a mom. Now you are.
No.
You sort of met your daughter assistant. And I'm just wondering, since you've become a mom, do you find that influences the stories that you're drawn to?
Yeah, for sure. I can't write about anything happening to a kid. I just can't. I don't think I could write Still Missing. I don't even know if I could write Never Knowing now. Right. So yeah, but what I always found interesting is I have, I think, 3 or 4 different books where the woman has one child and it's a daughter. And 3 of them, 4 of them, 3 of them, can't remember anymore. 3 of them were written before I had my daughter, or 4 of them. I wrote a lot of them before I had my daughter. So I find that really interesting that it kept giving them like one child. But yeah, I can't write about kids. I did and Never Let You Go. I had a daughter and it was fun. I was able to use aspects of me and Piper, my daughter's relationship, and our conversations and certain things that she does and that we do together. I could dot those in there a little bit. And the only way I was able to do that book was that the father was again. Sorry, are you there?
Oh, that's all right.
For a second. So it was very specific because I couldn't have the girl be hurt. So I wouldn't be able to write any kidnapping books or anything.
Yeah, it's always interesting to ask because one of my friends, Wendy Corsi Staub, I don't know if you know of her, but she's written like 90 books and she's a mom. She has 2 kids and her whole thing was if she wrote something in a book, she could cross it off her list and feel like that would never happen. So she would take all of her biggest fears and put them in a book. And then one of her best friends, Allison Galen, sort of did the opposite and she wouldn't write about children, who were her daughter's age at that time. So it's just interesting to see, how people feel about that.
It's exactly the same. I think it's Jennifer Hillier who told me that she likes to actually write about the things that scare her because for her, it's a feeling of owning it. Whereas my much more egotistical think that if I write it, it's like drawing this into my life somehow. It's like bad karma. So yeah, I won't touch that one. So
I feel that. I feel like, whenever things are going well, I don't want to say that publicly.
It's like you don't want to jinx yourself, right?
Yeah.
My agent always has this thing, you got to spit 3 times. Like if you, it's, like if you're not supposed to say something good before it's happened, if you do, you spit 3 times to erase that. I have my superstitions. But also Piper, she wants me to use her name too. But I said, well, I don't think you want to be in my book. But maybe one day, but again, it would be a very careful what character I ever did that for. So
sure. Absolutely. All right. So I have to ask you about the day that, you woke up and you realized that Stephen King was on Twitter and he was talking about how tired he was of all the books with girl in the title, except for your book, Those Girls. And he told the whole world, how incredibly scary and suspenseful it was. So what was it like to realize that that's what Stephen King was telling the world about you and your book?
Yeah, that was wild. I think that happened part way through the day. I can't remember what I was doing, but I kept getting a bunch of tweets, like a bunch of notifications. And then I think it was Jennifer Hillier that actually texted me and sent me the screenshot or something. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? It took me a minute. Yeah, that was coolest. That'll be the highlight of my life, just for sure. One of my book clubs sent me a mug and it says on it, I scared the king. And I just, that's awesome. I'll have that forever. It goes around on your, I still, I've pinned it. It's on the pin of my top of my Facebook, that will never go away. And I was just looking, it just still doesn't feel real. That person even knows you exist is because he's probably the only writer that like that I would consider a celebrity for me.
Right.
Like that I would probably, like I admire a lot of people for sure, but he's probably the one that I would get very, I would do that.
Understandable.
Like I'm positive because he's like the Elvis of the writing world, you know, he's just is. And so that was definitely the biggest. I can content with that one. I got really mad when I was reading some of the comments though, and some people implied that like my publishers paid him to do that, which is hilarious as much as it made me mad, because do you really think Stephen King needs that money?
Yeah, right.
Like,
if
no.
anybody needs it less, like
you think that was his coffee money? Like I'll just sell some blurbs. So that, plus that was a 3-year-old book.
Right.
So if my publishers are they're not gonna do it for that book I wrote 3 years ago. And then the other one was all the people going, oh my God, I hate books with girls in the title. And I'm like, I wrote that before it was happening. Like,
that's right. You like predated that trend, but
yeah, I started that trend.
You did.
Oh, well, I think Girl on the Train kind of started that one.
Or that.
Whatever. I was in the beginning of that curve.
You absolutely were.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty cool to be able to take with you the entirety of your life. I mean, I think you wrote on Twitter, like, thought I'm on the floor. Like, you mean you literally just got up off the floor to do this interview, and I'm assuming you're just going to like go right back to the floor when
Yeah. Well, I did a TikTok. I've only maybe made 4 TikTok videos, and like 3 of them are my dog or something. But I did one because I noticed him and I had the same publication date. So I made a TikTok about how you realize you have the same date, but then you remember you scared him. And then I used my mug or whatever. That was I'll probably be able to ride the Stephen King thing for at least every book. I'll find some way to work that in, you know, one day. Actually, he's on the Scotland Bloody Words thing. I wonder when that starts, because you can buy tickets to watch him and Linwood Barclay talk.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Like, why would you want to do that? That's pretty awesome.
I've never seen him do anything, so that'd be cool.
Yeah, do that. All right, last question for you, because you were already kind enough to tease House Invasion on Wheels, so I don't have to ask you that at the end. But for people who are tuning in, you know, and they want some words of encouragement or advice, I ask everybody, you know, what is the best advice in terms of a creative or writing life that you remember ever getting, and then the best advice that you never got and sort of had to learn for yourself throughout the process of the actual writing?
You know, the thing I could have used the most advice on, but was just the big learning curve, and I've been able to help some of my other Canadian friends, though, is the business side of it. It was just the tax stuff, honestly. Corporation, like all of that, the treaty status we have with different countries, and those were things that nobody could really guide me through. And I know it's not about writing, but that was like really to get yourself an accountant that really knows what they're doing. And I've been able to hook up 2 of my friends with like, okay, listen, my accountant's been sorting this out for me for like however, so go talk to them, you know. And so honestly, the business side of it was a bit more of a challenge. I don't know, I had to stumble through a lot of that. So hey, any writers out there trying to figure it out in Canada, you can call. So that was advice. That was good advice. Oh, so probably one of the best pieces of advice my editor has ever given me is don't make the tail wag the dog. I didn't know what that meant, but now I know that one all the time. It's if you decide in your head how you want your story to work out, and if you're trying to work towards a particular ending, you'll keep mixing your story, you'll try to guide it to that. And once you start trying to justify your character doing really nutso shit because you're trying to get to that, then you're making the tail wag the dog. And so I'll remind myself of that when I feel like I'm really trying to manipulate somebody to do something. And and this is the other thing, one of my friends and I always remind each other, if you're working that hard to justify something, you got to find a different way around it, because you shouldn't have to sell your reader on why somebody's doing something that doesn't make sense, because it doesn't make sense and they will know it doesn't make sense. So that's a big one. And then also my agent has a really good one. He always says, don't tell a Jack story, which I didn't know what that was until I Googled it, which is basically don't freak yourself out about something before it's happened. So that's a good one. And then my feedback always for new people is, I always say people have to be a lot more open to feedback than they realize. And they have to, but the learning what to take and not take takes a while to learn your own. Okay, maybe they're pinpointing a problem. I don't have to fix it the way they're suggesting, but there are, are they right to notice something about this area and stuff like that? But biggest issue with a lot of writers is they just bang it out and then they think they're done and they just.
And it's only just begun.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to, it takes the right people to get feedback from. I don't just get feedback from anybody.
Right.
I have a very select crew that I work, believe in, and that I know can explain it to me in a way that's not going to piss me off or make me feel defensive. They don't know shit about, like they can trigger you, but I think that's a big thing. You have to be really put your ego aside.
Yeah. That's excellent advice. And it's so true. I mean, it really is like a learning experience. One, to be receptive to the feedback, and two, to know who those trusted people are when you know that you can actually take that feedback is good.
And I worked with a freelance editor for like my first 6 books. I think this is the only one I didn't do it with. And that's just because my level is different. And also I have a very good selected friends that are all published authors that are to that level themselves. Right. But previously on my first book, yeah, for sure. That's how you learn, is to have your own stuff. You can only look at it this way, you need somebody else to just tilt it and go, but this, and then you go, oh, so that was probably I learned the most through feedback, I would think.
Oh, perspective.
Yeah. And then you learn too. Like if one of my friends always points out that I have a tendency to always open with weather, the temperature of the day, I'll be mindful. This book around, I'm like, okay, so don't say it was hot. Okay. It was windy.
So true. All right. I'm going to let you get back to your evening because you've been more than generous with your time. Thank you.
I always got lots to say. Like I said, I'm a friendly introvert.
I love it. I love it. So people have to pick it up. Chevy Stevens, Dark Roads. I mean, scared Stephen King, she will scare you too. But it's like the good kind of scare, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're sold on that.
And don't just leave you scared like forever.
No, it might.
Just in your memories, nightmares, daydreams.
Just for the foreseeable future. But eventually you will get past it, maybe.
Therapy.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.